My wife and I are about to go on a road trip to Boston, a city that I haven't been to in over 10 years. So I want to bring a Switch game with me that carries some nostalgia with a new coat of paint. Luckily, there's been a big push by Nintendo at reviving old games, and there's no shortage of selection. We got straight up ports. Ports with a coat of HD paint. Deep cuts that no one thought would ever see the light of day again. And don't forget remasters with effort levels ranging from cash grab to just plain works of art. And of course, we have something just in the between. So avoiding turning my bag into one quick theft away from a very expensive insurance claim, why don't we just focus on that something in the between and take a look at one of Nintendo's most inoffensive recent releases to see what you can expect out of this game the next time you pull your Switch out. Welcome to the Nintendo Travel Guide, and today we will be looking at what to expect on a trip through the urban jungle of Mario vs. Donkey Kong. Alright, let's get into it.
Is there any history I need to know before embarking on this trip?
Despite many other developers at the time trying to pull their established 2D IP into the world of 3D graphics, Nintendo was sitting back and saying, maybe we shouldn't abandon all this. You know, the best games of all time. We made them. Hello? So from the jump of the Game Boy Advance era, Nintendo made it clear that they would be utilizing their back catalog to get the most out of this console. 5 of the 10 best-selling GBA games were SNES ports, and all of those came out in the first 2 years of the console's lifespan. Nintendo also took the framework of some of their best IPs that they were moving over to 3D and pushed the design limits of their 2D past to show that these old bones still had quite a lot of life in them. Suddenly, all these games that fans never thought would have gotten true 2D sequels were just popping out of the woodwork. One such game forgotten by Nintendo was the 1994 Game Boy version of Donkey Kong. It's an unassuming port at first glance, but it actually unfolds into being a full reimagining of the original, using a ton of creative liberties to morph this once titan of the arcade into a puzzle platformer unique unto itself. I mean, whoa, just look at that again. What Nintendo game is doing that? The game was received well, and it moved a lot of units, but it would lay dormant for 10 years until the GBA craze would turn Nintendo in the direction of tapping its number again for a spiritual successor of its own.
Have you been there in the past? What memories do you have of this?
To be honest, I never played the original during the GBA's lifespan, and I missed it on subsequent Virtual Console releases. As a kid, outside of a few positive reviews, it just never really stood out to me, especially among the GBA's absolutely stacked lineup at the time. I mean, it was hard enough for my parents to drag me away from this generation of Pokemon to go outside or eat, so Mario vs. Donkey Kong just didn't really have a chance at my time. I do for some reason remember the trailer for Tipping Stars piquing my interest 10 or so years ago, but just like everyone else on the planet, I went on to forget about it shortly after watching that direct.
Tell me some stories about what happened during your visit.
Just 2 years after Donkey Kong stormed into the arcades, Nintendo was served a lawsuit by Universal Studios for, get this, trademark infringement. What? Nintendo? Trademark infringement lawsuit?
Objection!
Nah, never. Universal claimed that Donkey Kong stole the story of their movie adaptation of King Kong and that they should be owed royalties. Well, long story short, Nintendo beat the allegations despite the similarity between the plots of the two. So, naturally, it should come as no surprise that, to honor the game that it was succeeding, Mario vs. Donkey Kong would also look to borrow its plot from another Hollywood hit, but this time, it would set its aspirations much higher. I'm of course talking about 1994's holiday classic Jingle All the Way. Yeah, that's right. The plot is set in action with Donkey Kong seeing a hot new Mario toy that he must have, but is dismayed to find that they're all sold out. Instead of waiting for these toys to be re-released years later with barely any revisions for full price, or being extorted on the aftermarket, Donkey Kong makes the only rational decision this economy presents him, which is just to go ahead and steal them all. Unfortunately for Kong, he was caught in the act by Mario. Naturally, as an Italian immigrant and a tradesman, our protagonist has probably been running this exact scenario through his head over and over, hoping he could one day be the proverbial good guy with the gun, so to speak. Non-violent crime or not, Mario must live out his power fantasy, so he decides to chase Donkey Kong through the city in hopes of enacting vigilante justice on him. And really, that's all there is to it. Since the story is so short, the game leans on its characters and animations to fill out the presentation of the title. The cutscenes are brief but bursting with personality. I really like Donkey Kong's design in this one, where they take his normalized design from modern games, but just give him a little bit of a bad hair day to show that he's actually bad this time. Mario is about as expressive as he gets in his standard titles, but they actually toned him down quite a bit from the original, in which he played the physical embodiment of that inarticulate Italian noises Sopranos meme.
What are you doing? What's going on here? Oh, yeah, mamma mia.
Most of his usual foes make an appearance here as well, but they all have wind-up toy designs, which I think are just kinda amazing. Overall, I think the game brings a cute premise that uses subtle character design and animation to establish the setting, and then it gets out of the way and lets the gameplay take over.
What did you do when you were there? Did you have fun?
In terms of things to do, right after that first cutscene, the story takes a backseat and you just get thrown right into the swing of things. Gameplay is the meat and potatoes here, and the core gameplay loop at first glance appears to be very familiar to those that have any experience with a 2D Mario game. However, right as you enter that first stage, you'll realize things are a little off. Those breathtaking jumps and boundless athletic feats that you traditionally accustom with Mario are suddenly gone. Oh, that's right. This isn't a Super Mario game. This is just a regular old chubby, tax-paying plumber Mario game. Now, with a slower, more puzzle-oriented pace than what you might expect, how does it all feel? Well, pretty good in my opinion. Mario's more grounded physics ties in well with the puzzle-oriented gameplay, almost forcing the player to slow down and think about your next steps, rather than just throwing caution to the wind like you might in Mario's more traditional haunts. And even now with sluggish momentum, Mario still controls as crisp and precise as you would expect. Outside of some occasional bomb hitbox weirdness, the gameplay makes a pretty seamless transition into a 3D engine, and even controls decent using a joystick. Alright, so moving around here feels good, but what about that world we're moving through? The standard puzzles here are relatively short and simple, all set in one room, so that you can quickly observe and start piecing together your strategy at a first glance. While easy to grasp, there's a trust right from the first chapter, which is essentially a poorly disguised tutorial, to not bore you with the tedium of hand-holding or browbeating you with instructions, but rather trust your ability to mentally dissect the game at your own speed and discretion. The philosophy carries out into a loop of simple to break down puzzles that provide quick bursts of the feeling of accomplishment without getting too overbearing. But while it sounds and feels like the experience is a sandbox game, it's more linear in actuality. The puzzles pretty much only have one solution, and while you can maybe use some advanced movement to shake things up a bit, every playthrough of a single level will almost always be the same. Each stage has 3 presents for you to collect to add an extra challenge, but honestly the placement of these are mostly in areas that you would naturally go to when solving the puzzle, and a lot of times they just feel a little bit redundant to get. This does hurt the replay value of the game to me, but I do think overall the actual design and process of solving the puzzles in this game is rather enjoyable. As you move through the different chapters, the game introduces you to unique gameplay elements, such as thematic enemies or environmental hazards, to keep your interaction with the world fresh. As these stages and chapters progress, these mechanics are rolled out in a variety of different ways, having you figure out how you can interact with them to solve increasingly complex obstacles. Where things really get shaken up is when the mini Marios are introduced. In these levels, you have to escort this band of robots through gauntlets of obstacles that they are woefully unprepared to handle. The inspiration from the classic game Lemmings is obvious here, and in typical Lemmings fashion, the difficulty ramps up big time when you suddenly have to micromanage these little assholes. Finding yourself babysitting might strike fear in people who have been scarred by escort missions in the past, but despite the challenge, I was never really frustrated here, and found these to be the most intellectually rewarding moments of the game. Oh, and before I forget, in typical Mario fashion, we of course have boss battles. The showdowns with Kong are all some variation of avoiding his barrage of inanimate objects he throws at you, to then go and smash him in the head with a barrel. I'm gonna voice a brave opinion here, and that's that I typically do not like boss fights in 2D platformers, as I feel like they usually break off from the momentum of typical gameplay to the point that I just find them jarring and more like a chore to complete, rather than something that actually adds to the experience. The boss fights here, on the other hand, are a little bit more palatable, as they really are just slightly disguised puzzles that more or less play like a standard level. Regardless, they're quick and simple enough for me to not dread getting to them, even though a few of the bosses here are the absolute lowlight of the gameplay. A complaint that I've been seeing a lot with this game is about its difficulty. I don't want to beat around the bush here, that's definitely a fair observation to make. The difficulty curve and pacing of the game was a pretty big concern to me. Once you complete the first chapter, I really feel like the difficulty plateaus until the last one, which is roughly 40% of the game that the level of challenge feels static. After you finish the game the first time, you get a whole new set of 8+ chapters, in which you always need to chaperone a mini Mario, as well as some remixed boss fights. These ramp up the difficulty and change the game from the base experience quite a bit, but from when you start it, it really doesn't feel like the puzzles are getting harder here either until maybe the last 2 chapters of these as well. Changes were also made to the remake from the original that make it even easier, such as vastly changing the height that Mario can fall from before he tumbles, or making all the hammers respawn after use. All in all, the difficulty does stagnate here for such long stretches in this game, and only really starts to feel like a challenge towards the end. Well, I don't think it ruins the entire gameplay experience, as I still found myself really enjoying playing through these levels, even if I was beating most of them in one shot. The ease of completing things definitely left me wanting a little more pushback through my playthrough, but I want to stress, even if the game is easy, the gameplay as a whole is well designed and keeps away that monotony you might feel from other easy titles. It's certainly noticeable, but don't let the balancing here keep you away from experiencing what is otherwise a great gameplay experience all around.
Did you catch any beautiful views or nice vibes on your trip?
The wild goose chase that Donkey Kong drags us through finds us sightseeing a varied world. The art design that brings us all to life is colorful and clean in a way that is certainly nice enough to look at while you rack your brain over puzzles. The backgrounds feel like a cross between old Hollywood backdrops and Edward Hopper paintings that evoke that post-war American consumerism vibe. Creatures and characters that inhabit the world also boast simplistic designs, as they all have these little quirks when they move along that just add a little bit of life to them and their surroundings. Of course, this adventure begins and ends in a city, but along the way we're run around to such places as a jungle, a volcano, a snowy mountain, and even a ghost house. And if you're just thinking, man, isn't this just standard cookie-cutter Mario locations? I mean, yeah, you're totally right. However, so many Mario games in the past have found a way to use the template of these recurring locations to create these inspired locales that are brimming with creativity and the personality of each game that hosts them. The worlds and backgrounds here just don't really stick out at all as you play, and really lack any in-game inspiration as to why you're in these places other than what feels like meeting a quota. Oh, this is a Mario game after all. Can't have one of these without having lava on the ground at some point. Seemingly, the aim of the design points in the direction to avoid distracting you from the puzzle at all costs over even impressing you, or worse, expressing itself. Even though the original title had a crunched and ugly art style that I'm personally not fond of, it did manage to inspire this feeling of digging through a Mario-themed toy box that I feel like has been kinda sterilized in this remake. Now, I'm not accusing this game of laziness like, say, other companies' mascots running through an open world of Unity market asset Pacific Northwest hell, but I just feel like there was a lot of missed opportunity here. Even the designs of Twilight City and the Mini Factory, which I personally hold as the locations that best personify the experience of this game, just seem a little too clean and soulless. If the endless girders towering over you in the original Donkey Kong are supposed to invoke the excitement of Brooklyn, then why are the empty and uniform brick buildings of the spiritual successor just constantly giving off Cleveland? No offense to Cleveland, just come on. It's clearly a downgrade here.
What about the local music scene? What did you hear out there?
Unlike certain cities that make embellished claims at founding a genre of music as a shameless attempt to pump tourism, the score of this game really actually does fit at home here. The soundtrack of the original uses an orchestra of crunchy samples, hectic drum fills, and a penchant of raising the tempo of each song 10 BPM higher than it should be to create this fun and energetic score that fits that wind-up toy motif that I was mentioning earlier. Being a remake, the Switch version of course uses most of the same songs and melodies as the base, but steers the vibe in its own direction. Jazz becomes the emphasis here, with a sharp swing of hi-hats to set the rhythm, and the kitchen sink of high-quality instruments setting the stage of the world around you. Foregoing the frenetic soundscape of the original score, the new arrangements look to play more of an accompanying part for the whole experience. And in that role, I think the music here shines. Easy listening and elevator vibes accentuate the mood of the gameplay towards contemplation rather than frustration. The songs are all designed to be simple and are never looking to demand your attention. But even in this complementary role, I feel like it's still hit or miss in terms of being used to build immersion, especially where the art design falls a little flat at. The jungle and spooky house themes carry a lot of weight, squeezing out personality. Where the muted tracks on Fire Mountain and Slippery Summit further embellish the generic feeling of these locations. Now, I've seen a lot of fans complain about the new direction of the soundtrack online, and I think the criticism of it losing the tone and personality of the original is fair. But, personally, I think that the new soundtrack actually fits the slightly revamped art design and tone of the remake rather well. Sure, it may sound a little bit more clean cut, but the game looks and feels cleaner, so shouldn't the music reflect that? And in my opinion, it does that and sounds great in the process.
Was this trip worth it? How much did you pay?
As we looked at all of the aspects of my experience with this game, I had my fair share of criticisms that I addressed. But from looking at the conversation about this game online, the main thing I see people complaining about is the price and the game length. While not a full price $60 title, $50 is high enough to raise people's eyebrows, when some other remade titles such as Metroid Prime was only $40. I don't think that this is a fair comparison as, especially from an art standpoint, this game required a lot more effort to remake than Metroid probably did. Also, there's a decent amount of new content as this game has 4 new chapters and 4 additional extra hard levels at the end to complete. New to this version as well are time attack and multiplayer modes that I didn't cover here, but do add some replayability to this version. But I wouldn't really consider these game-selling additions at all. In terms of the length, my playthrough took about 11 or so hours to finish the whole game, including all the extra levels, but I could see people finishing this in closer to 6, especially those who have played the game on GBA before. After finishing this one, I just don't really see myself having the urge to revisit it anytime soon, but regardless of the short length and whatever, I personally do consider this game worth the $50 I spent on it, but for most people, I wouldn't recommend trying to pick this one up unless you can get it for $30 or less.
What type of trip should I plan this one to be?
With short pick up and play levels that don't require a ton of brain power, I think this game fits a lot of trips that you might find yourself going on. However, I keep dragging myself back to this urban setting of the game, and I think this one is best suited for a weekday commute on public transit. It's just so easy to grab this game and to get immersed in the gameplay quickly, while its short level structure allows you to get enjoyment out of it whether you live a few stops or more than an hour away from your office.
Which top 4 list would this trip find itself on?
You might be thinking to yourself, everything about this game seems middle of the road. What top 4 could it possibly end up on? Well, there's definitely a few Mount Rushmores that this can squeeze onto. I think this definitely deserves a spot on the top 4 remakes of Nintendo games that no one expected, or on the top 4 games that received full remakes that literally no one was asking for.
Give me a brief summary of your trip. How would you rate it overall?
Alright, this one went a little longer than planned, but let's wrap things up with scores. I give Mario vs. Donkey Kong's story and presentation a 6.7 out of 10, its gameplay a 7.5, the art direction a 7.2, the music and sound a 7.6, and the replayability and value a 5.7 for an overall score of 34.7 out of 50. And here's a brief synopsis. Mario reignites his feud with Donkey Kong for a short but sweet romp that isn't perfect, but always tends to feel better than the sum of his parts. A new coat of paint and accessibility on the Switch makes this a solid introductory title for anyone new to the puzzle platformer genre, but maybe at a discounted price. Alright, this wraps things up for this video, thanks to anyone who stuck it out until the end. I plan on making this a monthly-ish series, reviewing every new Nintendo-developed game as they come out, and possibly some other shorter-form Nintendo-related content here as well. So make sure you like and subscribe, otherwise, when I finally catch Mips here, I'm going to throw him into the Boston Harbor without an inflation device.